My name is Daniel, and today I'm going to tell you about the night that changed everything. The night when God spoke directly to my heart with words that shattered every fear I had about my future. Before I continue, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel if this story touches your heart. Share it with someone you love who might need to hear these words, and please leave a comment telling me about your own experiences with God's voice in your life. It was March 15th, 2023, and I was sitting in my small apartment in downtown Chicago, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay and rejection letters from jobs I desperately needed. The city lights flickered through my window like distant stars, but all I could see was darkness ahead. At 28, I felt like my life was falling apart faster than I could hold it together. I had been unemployed for 6 months after the marketing company I worked for suddenly downsized. My savings were gone, my credit cards were maxed out, and my landlord had already given me 2 extensions on rent. Every morning I woke up with this crushing weight in my chest, a fear so deep it felt like drowning in slow motion. The apartment felt smaller each day, like the walls were closing in on me. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in cold sweats, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if I became homeless? What if I had to move back in with my parents at nearly 30? What if I never found another decent job? The questions spiraled endlessly, each one feeding the next until I could barely breathe. That particular night, the anxiety was unbearable. I had spent the day job hunting, sending out resumes and getting the same automated rejection emails. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. Those words had become the soundtrack of my failure. My phone buzzed with another overdue notice, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I buried my face in my hands and felt tears streaming down my cheeks. Tears of frustration, shame, and terror about what tomorrow might bring. I was exhausted from pretending everything was fine when people asked how I was doing. I was tired of putting on a brave face when inside I felt like I was dying a slow death of disappointment and fear. The silence in my apartment was deafening. No TV, because I'd cancelled cable months ago. No music, because even that felt like too much stimulation for my frayed nerves. Just me, alone with my thoughts and the weight of an uncertain future pressing down on my shoulders like a boulder I couldn't move. I hadn't prayed in years. Growing up, my grandmother used to tell me about God's love, about how He had plans for my life, about how faith could move mountains. But life had beaten that faith out of me somewhere along the way. College, career ambitions, the daily grind of adult responsibilities, they had all pushed God to the margins until He became just a childhood memory, like believing in Santa Claus. Yet sitting there in my desperation, with nowhere else to turn and no one else to call at midnight, I found myself whispering into the darkness, "God, if you're real, if you're listening, I need you. I'm scared. I don't know what to do anymore. I've tried everything I can think of and nothing is working. If you have a plan for my life, like my grandmother used to say, I need to see it now because I'm drowning." The silence that followed felt heavy, almost expectant. I wiped my eyes and was about to give up, about to sink back into my despair, when something extraordinary happened. It wasn't an audible voice, no booming sound from heaven or mysterious whisper in the air, but it was clearer than any sound I'd ever heard. Deep in my spirit, like words written directly on my heart with fire, I heard, "Daniel, do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way." The peace that washed over me was indescribable. It was like someone had lifted a 1,000-pound weight from my shoulders. My racing heart slowed down, my clenched fists relaxed, my breathing became steady and deep. For the first time in months, I felt safe. Not because my circumstances had changed. The bills were still there, the rejection letters were still stacked on my desk, but because I suddenly knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't walking this path alone. I sat there for hours, just absorbing what had happened. Those words kept echoing in my mind. "Do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way." It wasn't just comfort. It was a promise. It wasn't just encouragement. It was a revelation. God wasn't telling me that tomorrow would be easy, but that it was already taken care of, already planned, already prepared by hands much more capable and loving than mine. The phrase, "I have already prepared the way," hit me especially hard. Past tense. Already done. While I had been panicking about the future, God had already been there, setting things up, arranging circumstances, preparing opportunities I couldn't see yet. My grandmother's words came flooding back. God's timing is perfect, Daniel. He's never early, never late, always right on time. That night I slept peacefully for the first time in months. No nightmares about being evicted. No anxiety dreams about endless job interviews. No cold sweats at 3 a.m., just deep, restful sleep, wrapped in a peace that truly passed all understanding. When I woke up the next morning, the bills were still there. The job situation hadn't magically resolved, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. Instead of waking up to fear, I woke up to curiosity. If God had already prepared the way, what did that way look like? What doors was he about to open? What opportunities had he already set in motion that I just couldn't see yet? The transformation wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. I realized that all those months of anxiety had been rooted in the belief that my future depended entirely on my own limited abilities, my own networking skills, my own resume, my own charm in interviews. But God's words revealed a different truth. My future was in the hands of someone who loved me beyond measure and had power beyond my imagination. As I made coffee that morning, cheap, instant coffee, but it tasted like the finest brew, I found myself smiling, not because my problems were solved, but because I finally understood something profound. Tomorrow wasn't something to fear, it was something to anticipate with joy. God had already been there, already made preparations, already set things in motion that I couldn't see yet. This was just the beginning of the most incredible journey of my life. Over the next weeks and months, I would discover just how true those words were, and how God's preparation for my future was more beautiful and perfect than anything I could have imagined on my own. If you're struggling with fear about your future right now, if you're lying awake at night wondering how things will work out, I want you to know that the same God who spoke to me that night is speaking to you too. He sees your situation, he knows your needs, and he has already prepared the way ahead of you. Don't lose hope. Your breakthrough might be just around the corner, prepared by loving hands you can't see yet. The morning after God spoke to me brought an unexpected gift, hope, where there had been only despair. I woke up naturally without the jarring alarm that usually thrust me into another day of worry. Instead, I felt this gentle pull to get up and face whatever lay ahead, like someone was softly calling my name from the future. As I got dressed, I found myself humming an old hymn my grandmother used to sing, "Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father." I hadn't thought about that song in years, but there it was, flowing from my lips like a prayer I didn't know I remembered. The melody filled my small apartment with something it had been missing for months: joy. My morning routine felt different too. Instead of frantically checking my phone for emails and job notifications first thing, I sat by my window with my coffee and just listened. The city was waking up around me. Car horns, footsteps on the sidewalk, distant conversations. But underneath all that noise, there was something else. A quiet assurance that whispered, "Today is going to be significant." I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk without any agenda. No job interviews to rush to, no networking events to stress about, just a simple walk through my neighborhood. As I stepped outside, the morning air felt crisp and full of possibility. Even the familiar streets looked different somehow, like I was seeing them with new eyes. The weight I'd carried in my chest for so long was gone. In its place was this lightness, this sense of expectation. I found myself noticing things I'd walked past hundreds of times. A mural on the side of a building depicting hands reaching toward the sky. An elderly man feeding pigeons with such gentle care. A mother pushing her baby in a stroller while singing softly. About 6 blocks from my apartment, I passed a small coffee shop I'd never noticed before. It had a handwritten sign in the window. Now hiring, friendly faces wanted. Something inside me nudged me to go in, even though I'd never worked in food service and had no restaurant experience. The nudge was gentle but persistent, like someone tapping me on the shoulder. The moment I walked in, the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods enveloped me. The place had a warm, cozy atmosphere, exposed brick walls lined with local artwork, mismatched chairs and tables that somehow worked perfectly together, and soft jazz playing in the background. It felt like home. The owner, a kind-looking woman in her 50s named Sarah, was behind the counter arranging pastries in the display case. Her grey hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore an apron covered in coffee stains and flour. When I asked about the job, she looked me up and down with sharp but friendly eyes and said, "You don't look like you've worked in coffee before." I laughed and admitted she was right, but told her I was a hard worker and willing to learn anything. There was something about her presence that made me feel comfortable being honest. "I used to work in marketing," I said, "but I'm in a transition period right now. I need work, and I promise you won't find anyone more grateful for the opportunity." What happened next still gives me chills when I think about it. Sarah paused, studied my face for a moment, and her expression softened. "You know what?" she said slowly. "I had the strangest dream last night about hiring someone who didn't fit the usual profile, someone who needed a second chance, someone who would bring something different to this place." She handed me an application from under the counter. "Fill this out. When can you start?" I could hardly believe it. Less than 24 hours after God told me not to fear tomorrow because he had already prepared the way, he was already showing me part of his preparation. This wasn't the high-powered marketing career I'd been desperately chasing, but it was provision. It was hope. It was proof that God's ways are often different from our plans, but always perfect in their timing. "I can start today if you need me," I said, and meant it. Sarah smiled. "I like your enthusiasm. Come in tomorrow at 6 a.m. and I'll train you. Fair warning, it's hard work and the pay isn't great, but we're like family here." As I walked home, application in hand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. Not tears of frustration or fear this time, but tears of overwhelming thankfulness. God had heard my desperate prayer, and he was already moving in my life. That evening, I called my grandmother for the first time since I'd lost my job. I'd been too ashamed to tell her about my struggles, too proud to admit I was failing. But now, with this glimmer of hope, I found the courage to share what had happened. "Danny," she said, using my childhood nickname, "I've been praying for you every single day. I knew God was working something out, even when you couldn't see it." Her voice was full of warmth and certainty. "Sometimes he has to take us through the valley to get us to the mountaintop, but he never leaves us in the valley." We talked for over an hour. I told her about the divine encounter the night before, about hearing God's voice in my spirit, about the coffee shop job that felt like a miracle. She listened with the kind of faith that only comes from decades of walking with God, occasionally saying, "That's my Jesus," or "He's so good, isn't he?" "You know what this reminds me of?" she said toward the end of our conversation. "When Moses was leading the Israelites through the wilderness. They couldn't see where they were going, but God had already prepared manna for the next day, water from rocks, pillars of fire to guide them. He was always one step ahead, preparing the way." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, the same place where I'd felt so hopeless the night before, and marveled at how quickly God could change everything. Not the circumstances themselves, but my perspective on them. The bills were still there, but they no longer felt insurmountable. The uncertainty about my future remained, but it no longer terrified me. I opened my Bible for the first time in years, dusty from neglect, but still there on my bookshelf. It fell open to Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future." Plans, present tense. Not "I will make plans," but "I know the plans I have." God had been planning this transition all along, even when it felt like my life was falling apart. The job loss that had seemed like a disaster was actually a setup for something new. The months of struggle weren't punishment. They were preparation. As I prepared for bed, I whispered another prayer, this one filled with anticipation rather than desperation. God, thank you for speaking to me. Thank you for preparing the way. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I know you've already been there. Help me trust you as this new chapter unfolds. Sleep came easily that night, and with it came dreams not of failure and fear, but of possibility and purpose. God's preparation was just beginning to unfold, and I was ready to follow wherever He led. My first day at the coffee shop began at 5:30 a.m. with nervous excitement and a prayer whispered in the dark. As I walked through the empty streets of Chicago, the city felt different in those early morning hours, quieter, more peaceful, almost sacred. Street lights created pools of warm light on the sidewalk, and I found myself walking from one to the next, each step feeling like progress towards something meaningful. Sarah was already there when I arrived, moving efficiently through the opening routine with the grace of someone who had done this thousands of times. The shop smelled like coffee beans and cinnamon, and morning light was just starting to filter through the large front windows. She handed me an apron, forest green with the shop's logo, and I tied it around my waist like armor for a new battle. First lesson, she said, showing me how to work the espresso machine. Coffee is more than just a drink here. For most of our customers, this is the first human interaction of their day. We're not just serving coffee, we're serving hope, comfort and connection. As she taught me the basics, how to steam milk to the perfect temperature, how to pull a shot that wasn't too bitter or too weak, how to clean the equipment between orders, I realized this wasn't just a job, this was ministry. Every cup was an opportunity to brighten someone's morning, to offer a smile to someone who might be struggling just like I had been. The morning rush started around 7 a.m. A steady stream of commuters, each with their own story, their own struggles, their own need for that perfect cup of coffee to fuel their day. Sarah worked beside me, handling the more complex orders, while I focused on simple drinks and learning names. There was Janet, a nurse finishing her night shift at the hospital nearby. Dark circles under her eyes, but a warm smile as she ordered her usual, large coffee, extra cream, no sugar. "Tough night?" I asked as I prepared her drink. "Lost a patient," she said quietly. "Young guy, motorcycle accident. Sometimes this job." She trailed off, and I saw the pain in her eyes. Without thinking, I found myself saying, "I'm sorry for your loss. You're doing important work, saving lives every day. That young man, you made sure he wasn't alone at the end. That matters more than you know." She looked surprised, then touched. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." She left a larger tip than usual and walked out standing a little straighter. Sarah noticed. "You're a natural at this," she said. "Most people take months to learn how to really connect with customers like that." But I knew it wasn't natural talent. It was supernatural preparation. God was using my own experience of pain and desperation to help me recognize it in others and offer genuine comfort. The months of unemployment that had felt so pointless were actually training me for this moment, this ministry disguised as a minimum wage job. Around mid-morning, things slowed down enough for Sarah and me to talk more. She told me about opening the shop 5 years ago after her husband died, how it had been her way of creating something beautiful from her grief. "This place saved my life," she said. "Giving people a warm place to start their day, building community one cup at a time. It gave me purpose when I thought I'd lost everything." Her story resonated deeply with me. Here was someone else who had experienced loss and found that God could use broken pieces to create something beautiful. "I think God led me here," I told her. "Yesterday I was desperate, and today I'm exactly where I need to be." She smiled. "I know He did. That dream I had about hiring someone different, I've learned to pay attention when God speaks, even in dreams, especially in dreams." The afternoon brought a different crowd. Students with laptops, mothers with strollers, elderly people meeting friends for conversation. Each interaction felt significant, like I was exactly where God wanted me to be. When a college student broke down crying over her failed exam, I listened and offered encouragement. When an elderly man came in looking lonely, I took a few extra minutes to chat about his late wife and his garden. But the most powerful moment came near closing time. A businessman in an expensive suit rushed in, clearly stressed and talking loudly on his phone about some crisis at work. While I made his complicated order, double-shot cortado with oat milk and an extra shot, I couldn't help but remember how that used to be me just days ago. Frantically trying to control everything, stressed about the future, driven by fear instead of faith. When I handed him his drink, I felt that same gentle urging I'd experienced the morning I found this job. "I hope your day gets better, sir. Sometimes the things that seem like setbacks are actually setups for something greater." He looked at me surprised, paused his phone call, and for a moment I saw past his business facade to a tired, worried man who needed encouragement. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and something shifted in his eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "I needed to hear that. I've been so focused on what's going wrong that I forgot. Sometimes things work out differently than we plan, but that doesn't mean they work out wrong." He lingered for a moment, then added, "My grandfather used to say something like that. I haven't thought about his wisdom in years." He left a generous tip and walked out looking somehow lighter. His phone call resumed, but with a calmer tone. That evening, as Sarah and I closed up the shop, I reflected on how dramatically my perspective had changed in just one day. 24 hours ago, I would have seen working in a coffee shop as a failure, a step backward from my career goals. But now I could see it as part of God's beautiful preparation. He wasn't just providing for my immediate financial needs. He was positioning me to be His hands and feet to hurting people, while simultaneously healing my own wounded heart. Every customer interaction was an opportunity to practice love, to offer hope, to be part of someone else's story in a meaningful way. The words He'd spoken to me, "Do not fear tomorrow, I have already prepared the way," were proving true in ways I never could have imagined. His preparation wasn't just about my circumstances, it was about preparing me to be useful in His kingdom, to find purpose in serving others, and to discover that His plans are always better than mine. As I walked home that night, my feet tired but my heart full, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, God, for seeing what I couldn't see. Thank you for preparing not just a job, but a calling. Help me to be faithful in this small thing so you can trust me with greater things." God's way forward was unfolding beautifully, one day at a time, one divine appointment at a time. I was beginning to understand that His preparation of my path included preparing my heart to walk it with joy, purpose, and an eagerness to serve others along the way. 3 weeks into working at the coffee shop, I had settled into a rhythm that felt more natural than anything I'd experienced in my corporate career. The early mornings no longer felt like a burden, they felt like a gift. Those quiet hours before the city fully awakened became my favorite time of day, when I could prepare not just coffee and pastries, but my heart for whatever divine appointments God had planned. I was learning that every regular customer had a story, and somehow God was weaving me into those stories in ways that surprised me daily. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who came in every Tuesday and Thursday, had become especially dear to my heart. She always ordered the same thing, a small green tea with honey, and always sat at the corner table by the window. On this particular Thursday morning, Mrs. Chen arrived looking more fragile than usual. Her usual gentle smile was strained, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for her purse. When I brought her tea to the table, instead of her customary polite nod, she looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Are you all right, Mrs. Chen?" I asked, sitting down across from her. Sarah had taught me that sometimes the most important part of our job happened away from the coffee machine. "Today would have been my wedding anniversary," she said quietly. 52 years. Harold passed 6 months ago, and I still set 2 places at the breakfast table. I still make enough tea for both of us. Her voice broke slightly. I don't know how to be just one person after being half of something for so long. My heart ached for her. I thought about my grandmother, who had been widowed for 10 years and still spoke about my grandfather as if he had just stepped out to the store. Mrs. Chen, can I tell you something? I think love that deep doesn't just disappear when someone dies. It transforms into something else, into memories that comfort us, into wisdom that guides us, into the ability to love others even more deeply because we know how precious it is. She reached across the table and patted my hand. You're very wise for such a young man. How do you know about love like this? I found myself sharing about my grandmother, about how her love for my grandfather had shaped her into someone who could love everyone around her with extraordinary grace. She tells me that love doesn't end with death. It just changes address. It moves from our hands to our hearts, where it can live forever. Mrs. Chen smiled through her tears. Harold would have liked you. He always said the world needed more young people who understood that life is about connections, not achievements. After she left, I stood at the window watching her walk down the street, moving slowly but with more peace in her posture. I realized that God had used my own season of loss and searching to prepare me to comfort someone else in their grief. The months I'd spent feeling disconnected and purposeless were teaching me to recognize and respond to those same feelings in others. That afternoon brought another divine appointment. Marcus, a teenager who came in after school, slumped into his usual chair with his backpack hitting the floor harder than usual. He ordered his regular hot chocolate, but sat staring out the window instead of pulling out his homework like he normally did. "Rough day?" I asked, bringing his drink over. "My parents finalized their divorce yesterday," he said without looking at me. "They keep saying it's not my fault, but if it's not my fault, why does it feel like my whole world is ending? Why does it feel like I did something wrong?" I sat down across from him, remembering my own teenage years when my parents went through a difficult period in their marriage. They had worked it out, but I still remembered the fear, the confusion, the sense that maybe if I had been a better son, things would have been different. "When I was about your age," I said, "I learned something important about guilt. Sometimes we feel guilty, not because we did something wrong, but because we care so much about the people we love that we want to take responsibility for their pain. That guilt you're feeling, it's actually love wearing a disguise." Marcus looked at me for the first time. "Really? Really? Your parents' marriage is between them. It has nothing to do with your worth or your character. But the fact that you care so deeply about your family shows what kind of person you are. That's something to be proud of, not ashamed of." We talked for another 20 minutes about dealing with change, about how sometimes the things that seem like endings are actually beginnings in disguise, about how God can use even painful situations to shape us into stronger, more compassionate people. When Marcus left, he was standing taller, and he actually smiled when he said goodbye. That evening, as I was cleaning the espresso machine, Sarah approached me with a thoughtful expression. "Daniel, I need to ask you something. Were you in ministry before you came here?" I laughed. "No, I was in marketing. Why do you ask?" "Because you minister to people naturally. I've been running this place for 5 years, and I've never seen someone connect with customers the way you do. It's like you see straight into their hearts and know exactly what they need to hear." Her words hit me deeply. I thought about what she was saying, and suddenly I understood something profound. My marketing background hadn't been a waste. It had taught me how to read people, how to understand what they needed, how to communicate effectively. But God was redirecting those skills towards something infinitely more meaningful than selling products. He was using them to minister hope, comfort, and love to hurting hearts. "I think," I said slowly, "God has been preparing me for this without me even knowing it. Everything I've experienced, the career success, the failure, the fear, the breakthrough, it's all been training for moments like today with Mrs. Chen and Marcus." Sarah smiled. "I've been praying about expanding our community outreach. What would you think about starting a support group here? Nothing formal, just a weekly gathering where people can share their struggles and encourage each other over coffee. The idea excited me immediately. It felt like another piece of God's preparation clicking into place. I'd love that. When do we start? How about next Thursday evening? We'll keep it simple, just create a safe space for people to connect and be real with each other. As I walked home that night, I marveled again at God's incredible faithfulness. The words he'd spoken to me, "Do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way," kept revealing new layers of meaning. He hadn't just prepared a job for me. He'd prepared a calling. He hadn't just provided income. He'd provided purpose. My marketing skills weren't wasted. They were being redirected toward the greatest marketing campaign of all, spreading hope, love, and healing to broken hearts. My season of unemployment wasn't punishment. It was preparation to understand and minister to others facing similar struggles. I was beginning to see that God's preparation is always multidimensional. He doesn't just prepare circumstances. He prepares hearts, skills, relationships, and opportunities. He takes everything we've experienced, the good and the bad, and weaves it together into something beautiful and useful for his kingdom. The coffee shop was becoming more than just my workplace. It was becoming my mission field, and I was more excited about tomorrow than I had been in years. Thursday evening arrived with an unexpected nervousness fluttering in my stomach. Sarah and I had spent the week preparing for our first community support group meeting, arranging chairs in a circle, preparing coffee and simple snacks, and most importantly, praying that God would bring the right people at the right time. "What if no one shows up?" I asked Sarah as we dimmed the main lights and lit a few candles to create a warm, intimate atmosphere. She smiled with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust God's timing. "Then we'll have a nice evening drinking coffee and talking about life. But something tells me that won't be the case." By 7 p.m., 12 people had gathered in our little circle. Some were regulars I recognized. Mrs. Chen sat next to Marcus, who had brought his younger sister Emma. Others were strangers who had seen our simple flyer in the window. Coffee, conversation, and community. Everyone welcome. Every story matters. There was Jennifer, a single mother struggling with depression after her divorce. Paul, a veteran dealing with PTSD who had heard about the group from a friend. Maria, an immigrant who felt isolated and lonely in a new country. Tom, a middle-aged man whose business had failed and who felt like he'd let his family down. Each person carried their own story of pain, hope, fear, and searching. I opened with a simple prayer, asking God to bless our time together and help us be real with each other. Then Sarah shared the story of starting the coffee shop after her husband's death. How grief had nearly destroyed her, but eventually became the foundation for helping others. "This isn't therapy," she explained. "This isn't church. Though we welcome God's presence here, this is just real people sharing real life and reminding each other that we're not alone in our struggles." The conversation started slowly, tentatively. Marcus shared about his parents' divorce and how it had shaken his faith in relationships. Mrs. Chen talked about the loneliness of widowhood and the challenge of rediscovering her identity as an individual rather than half of a couple. Then Jennifer broke down crying as she described the shame she felt about her divorce, how she blamed herself for not being able to keep her marriage together, how she worried that her 8-year-old son would grow up thinking love wasn't real or lasting. Something powerful happened in that moment. Instead of offering quick fixes or easy answers, the group simply sat with Jennifer in her pain. Mrs. Chen reached over and held her hand. Paul, the veteran, spoke quietly about how failure in one area of life doesn't define our entire worth. Maria shared her own story of starting over in America with nothing but hope and determination. I found myself sharing something I hadn't planned to. 3 months ago, I was sitting in my apartment, unemployed and terrified about my future. I felt like such a failure, like I'd wasted my education and disappointed everyone who believed in me. But that night, God spoke to my heart and told me not to fear tomorrow because he had already prepared the way. I looked around the circle at faces illuminated by candlelight. each person leaning forward, listening intently. What I've learned is that God's preparation isn't always what we expect. I thought He was preparing a new job for me, but He was really preparing me for ministry I didn't even know I was called to. This coffee shop, this group, each of you, you're all part of how God prepared the way. Tom, the businessman, spoke up. I've been angry at God for letting my business fail. I worked so hard, prayed so much, tried to do everything right. But sitting here tonight listening to all of you, I'm wondering if maybe the failure was preparation for something else. Maybe I needed to lose everything to find what really matters. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. People shared fears about the future, regrets about the past, hopes for healing and restoration. But more than that, they began to encourage each other with genuine love and understanding that could only come from people who had walked through their own valleys. Emma, Marcus's 15-year-old sister, had been quiet most of the evening, but near the end, she spoke up in a voice that was young, but wise beyond her years. I used to think that if God really loved us, bad things wouldn't happen. But listening to everyone tonight, I think maybe God's love isn't about preventing bad things. Maybe it's about being with us in the bad things and helping us help each other get through them. The room fell silent for a moment, absorbing the profound truth that had just come from a teenager. Then Mrs. Chen smiled and said, "Out of the mouths of babes. Emma, you just preached a better sermon than I've heard in most churches." As the evening wound down, people exchanged phone numbers and made plans to check on each other during the week. Jennifer asked if she could bring her son next time. Paul offered to help Tom with some handyman work around his house. Maria invited Mrs. Chen to her church's international dinner. Something beautiful was happening. Community was being born. Not the superficial kind that comes from shared interests or demographics, but the deep kind that comes from shared vulnerability and mutual support. After everyone left, Sarah and I sat in the quiet coffee shop, surrounded by empty chairs and the lingering warmth of genuine human connection. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never experienced anything like it." I nodded, still processing what had just happened. It's like God took all our broken pieces and put them together to create something beautiful. Each person's story complemented the others. Each person's pain became a source of comfort for someone else. "That's what the body of Christ is supposed to look like," Sarah said. "Not perfect people pretending to have it all together, but broken people helping each other heal." As I walked home that night, I thought about God's words to me. "Do not fear tomorrow, I have already prepared the way." I was beginning to understand that His preparation included not just circumstances and opportunities, but relationships and community. He had been preparing this group of people to find each other, to support each other, to remind each other that no one has to walk through life alone. My unemployment, my fear, my desperation, they had all been part of preparing me to recognize and minister to those same struggles in others. But even more than that, they had prepared me to receive ministry from others, to be vulnerable enough to need community and humble enough to accept help and encouragement. God's way forward wasn't just about my individual journey. It was about how my journey could intersect with others' journeys to create something bigger and more beautiful than any of us could accomplish alone. Tomorrow was no longer something to fear, but something to anticipate with joy, knowing that God was weaving our stories together in ways we couldn't see, but could trust completely. 6 months had passed since that life-changing night when God spoke to my heart, and the coffee shop had become the center of a growing community that none of us could have imagined. Our Thursday evening support group had grown from 12 people to nearly 30, and Sarah had started talking about expanding into the empty storefront next door to accommodate everyone. But God wasn't finished with His preparations for my future. It started with a conversation I overheard between 2 customers who came in regularly, both entrepreneurs discussing their struggles with finding reliable marketing help for their small businesses. As I cleaned tables nearby, I couldn't help but listen as they complained about expensive agencies that didn't understand their specific needs and freelancers who overpromised and underdelivered. That old familiar stirring in my chest returned. The passion I'd felt for marketing before the corporate world had beaten it out of me. But this time, instead of the desperate ambition that used to drive me, I felt something different. A gentle curiosity about whether God might be showing me something significant. Tom was one of the speakers, the same businessman whose company had failed and who had become a regular at our support group. He was talking to Lisa, a woman who ran a small cleaning service and had started attending our meetings after her husband left her with 2 young children and a struggling business. "I just don't know how to reach more customers without spending money I don't have," Tom was saying. "I've tried everything, newspaper ads, flyers, even hired a marketing consultant who charged me $3,000 and delivered nothing but a fancy logo I can't afford to use anywhere." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "Same here. My cleaning service is good. I have amazing references and my customers love me. But I can't seem to grow beyond word of mouth. I need more steady clients. But every marketing company I've talked to wants to charge me more per month than I make in profit." During my break, I approached their table with my heart pounding. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about marketing. I used to work in that field before life took a different turn. Would you mind if I asked what specific challenges you're facing?" What followed was a 2-hour conversation that felt like a divine appointment, orchestrated by heaven itself. As Tom and Lisa shared their struggles, ideas began flowing through me like water through a broken dam. Strategies for local SEO that could be implemented for free, social media approaches that would work on shoestring budgets, ways to automate customer communication using simple tools they could afford, referral programs that would turn their existing satisfied customers into their best marketing team. "You're describing exactly what we need," Lisa said, her eyes lighting up for the first time since I'd known her. "You understand our world in a way the big agencies never did. They kept talking about brand awareness and market penetration, but what I really need is more phone calls from people who want their houses cleaned." Tom was sketching notes on napkins as fast as I could talk. "This is incredible. You're taking these big marketing concepts and breaking them down into actual steps I can take tomorrow. How much would you charge to help us implement this stuff?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on helping them solve their problems that I hadn't considered this might be an opportunity for me. I don't know. I haven't thought about doing freelance marketing work." "Well, you should," Tom said firmly. "I'd hire you right now. So would Lisa, right?" Lisa nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. You get it. You understand that we're not trying to become Fortune 500 companies. We just want to build sustainable businesses that can support our families and serve our communities well." That night, I found myself back in the same chair where God had first spoken to me 8 months earlier. The city lights still flickered outside my window, but everything felt different now. I wasn't desperate or afraid. I was seeking guidance from someone I'd learned to trust completely with my future. "God," I prayed, "you've been so faithful to provide for me through the coffee shop. You've used this place to heal my heart and teach me how to serve others. But I'm sensing you might be stirring something new. If this marketing opportunity is part of your preparation for my future, please make it clear. If not, help me be content where you've placed me." The answer came not in words this time, but in a series of unmistakable confirmations over the following days. Sarah, my boss at the coffee shop, mentioned that she had been thinking about needing help with marketing the shop and our support group events. "I've been praying about how to reach more people who need what we're offering here," she said. "And here you are, with exactly the skills we need." Then Mrs. Chen approached me after our Thursday group meeting. "Daniel, my nephew runs a small restaurant in Chinatown. He's struggling to attract customers outside of our immediate community. Would you be willing to talk to him? I'll pay you myself if I have to." Even Marcus chimed in. My mom has been talking about starting a tutoring business now that she's finished her teaching degree. She keeps saying she doesn't know how to find students. Maybe you could help her too. By the end of the week, I had 5 potential clients, all people whose lives had intersected with mine through the coffee shop community. It was becoming clear that God wasn't taking me away from the ministry He'd given me. He was expanding it. The breakthrough moment came during a conversation with my grandmother. I called her to share what was happening and ask for her wisdom about this new direction. "Danny," she said in that gentle but firm voice I remembered from childhood, "do you remember what I used to tell you about God's gifts? They're not just for you. They're meant to be shared with others. Your marketing skills aren't separate from your ministry. They're part of it," she continued. "Think about it. These small business owners aren't just trying to make money. They're trying to serve their communities, provide for their families, create jobs for other people. When you help them succeed, you're helping them fulfill their calling too." Her words hit me like lightning. I'd been thinking about marketing and ministry as 2 separate things, but God was showing me they could be integrated. I could use my professional skills to serve others in a way that honored both their practical needs and their deeper calling to contribute something meaningful to the world. The next morning, I had a conversation with Sarah about reducing my hours at the coffee shop so I could start doing freelance marketing work. Instead of being disappointed, she was excited. "This is perfect," she said. "You can work mornings here, which are our busiest times, and do marketing work in the afternoons and evenings. Plus, you'll be helping people from our community, which means you're extending the ministry of this place into their businesses." She paused, then smiled. "And honestly, having someone with your heart and skills helping me market the coffee shop and our support group, that's an answer to prayer I didn't even know I was praying." D. As I prepared to embark on this new chapter, I marveled once again at God's incredible preparation. The marketing skills I thought I'd lost when I was laid off were actually being refined and redirected towards something more meaningful than I'd ever imagined. The community relationships I'd built through the coffee shop were becoming the foundation for a business that could serve both practical and spiritual needs. God's words to me, "Do not fear tomorrow, I have already prepared the way," were revealing yet another layer of His amazing foresight. He hadn't just prepared a job for me, or even a calling. He had prepared a way for me to use all of my gifts in service to others, while building something sustainable for my own future. Tomorrow was looking brighter than ever, not because I could see the whole path ahead, but because I trusted completely in the one who had already walked it and prepared every step. 3 months into my new routine of working mornings at the coffee shop and afternoons building my marketing consultancy, I was experiencing a kind of fulfillment I'd never known in my corporate career. Every day felt purposeful. Every client interaction felt meaningful, and every small success in helping someone's business grow filled me with a deep satisfaction that no paycheck had ever provided. Tom's handyman business had doubled its monthly revenue through the local SEO strategies we implemented together. Lisa's cleaning service now had a waiting list of potential clients, and she had been able to hire 2 part-time employees. Mrs. Jen's nephew's restaurant was attracting customers from all over the city after we created a simple social media campaign showcasing his authentic family recipes. But the most profound change wasn't in my clients' businesses. It was in my understanding of how God works through ordinary circumstances to accomplish extraordinary purposes. Each marketing project had become an opportunity to speak life, hope, and encouragement into someone's dreams and aspirations. It was during this season of growing confidence that God decided to test my faith in a way I never saw coming. The test arrived in the form of a phone call on a rainy Tuesday morning while I was preparing for the coffee shop's opening. "Daniel Thompson?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, slightly familiar. "Yes. This is Daniel. This is Richard Morrison from Morrison & Associates. We're the marketing firm that acquired your former company last year. I'll cut to the chase. We've been following your work with some local businesses, and we're impressed. We'd like to offer you a position as Senior Marketing Director with a starting salary of $95,000, full benefits, and equity options. My heart stopped. $95,000 was more than double what I was making between the coffee shop and my freelance work. It was the kind of opportunity I would have killed for 2 years ago, the kind of validation I had desperately craved during those dark months of unemployment. That's very generous, I managed to say. Can I ask how you heard about my current work? Tom Bradley recommended you. He's been doing some contracting work for one of our clients, and he couldn't stop talking about how you transformed his business. When we looked into your background and saw your previous work at Henderson Marketing, we knew we had to reach out. Tom, sweet, grateful Tom, who had become not just a client, but a friend. He had no idea that his recommendation might pull me away from everything I'd built here. I'd need some time to think about it, I said, my mind racing. Of course, but Daniel, opportunities like this don't come along often. We're talking about a corner office, your own team, major corporate clients. This is the big leagues. After hanging up, I stood in the empty coffee shop feeling like I was drowning in confusion. Just an hour ago, I had been completely at peace with my life, grateful for how God had redirected my path. Now I was questioning everything. Sarah arrived to find me staring out the window at the rain, lost in thought. "Everything okay?" she asked, immediately sensing my turmoil. I told her about the offer, watching her face carefully for any sign of disappointment or fear that I might leave. Instead, I saw something that surprised me, a gentle smile of understanding. "That's quite an offer," she said quietly. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, everything I've built here, the community, the relationships, the sense of purpose, I don't know if I'm ready to walk away from that. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then said something that cut straight to my heart. "Daniel, you need to ask yourself this question. Are you being called towards something, or are you running towards something? There's a big difference." Her words haunted me all day. As I served customers, each interaction reminded me of how much I had grown to love this life I'd built. When Mrs. Chen came in for her usual tea, she mentioned how much our support group had meant to her journey through grief. When Marcus stopped by after school, he told me he'd decided to study business in college because watching me help local entrepreneurs had inspired him to think about how he could serve his community. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the job offer letter in my hands, trying to pray but finding only confusion. Finally, I called my grandmother. "Grandma, I need your wisdom. I've been offered my dream job, or at least what I used to think was my dream job. Great money, prestige, everything I thought I wanted, but I'm not sure it's what God wants for me anymore." She listened as I described the offer, my current work, and my confusion about what to do. "Danny," she said finally, "let me ask you something. When you think about taking that corporate job, how does your spirit feel?" I considered her question honestly. Excited about the money and status, but heavy, like I'd be abandoning something important. And when you think about staying where you are, peaceful, excited about the possibilities, like I'm exactly where I belong, even if it's not where I thought I'd end up. "Then you have your answer," she said simply. "God doesn't call us to security or status, baby. He calls us to faithfulness and purpose. Sounds like you've already found both." The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt since receiving the call. During my quiet time before opening the coffee shop, I felt God speaking to my heart again, not in audible words like that first night, but in a deep, settled peace that seemed to whisper, "I have prepared the way, but it's not the way that looks impressive to the world. It's the way that transforms hearts, builds community, and serves love." I called Richard Morrison and politely declined the offer. "Are you sure?" he asked, clearly shocked. "Daniel, this is a 6-figure salary we're talking about, career advancement, professional recognition." "I'm sure," I said, and as the words left my mouth, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced since that night 8 months ago when God first spoke to me. I've found something more valuable than a big salary. I've found my calling. That afternoon, I had lunch with Tom to thank him for the recommendation, even though I'd turned down the opportunity. "You what?" he said, nearly choking on his sandwich. "Daniel, that was the incredible opportunity." "It was," I agreed, "but it wasn't my opportunity. Tom, a year ago, that job offer would have felt like salvation. Today, it felt like a distraction from what God has actually called me to do." Tom was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? I get it. Before I met you, I thought success was just about making money and growing bigger. But watching how you've helped not just my business but my family, how you've brought hope to our support group, how you've created something meaningful here, that's a different kind of success." He leaned forward. "And honestly, you're making more of a difference in this community than you ever could in some corporate tower downtown." That evening at our support group, I shared about the job offer and my decision to stay. The response was overwhelming. Jennifer, the single mother whose confidence had grown tremendously over the past months, spoke for the group. "Daniel, you've taught us that God's plans are always better than our plans. Thank you for trusting that truth yourself." As I walked home that night, I reflected on how God's preparation continues to unfold in unexpected ways. He had prepared not just opportunities for me, but tests of my faithfulness to the calling He'd given me. The corporate job offer wasn't a mistake or a temptation. It was a confirmation that I was exactly where I belonged. God's words echoed in my heart. "Do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way." His way wasn't always the way that looked most impressive or financially rewarding, but it was always the way that led to the deepest fulfillment and the greatest service to others. Tomorrow held more divine appointments, more opportunities to serve, more chances to see God's faithfulness in action, and I couldn't wait to see what He had prepared next. 1 year had passed since that transformative night when God spoke to my heart, and I was preparing to share my story publicly for the first time. Sarah had convinced me to speak at a local business networking event about finding purpose in your professional journey, and despite my nervousness, I felt a strong sense that this was another step in God's prepared path. The morning of the event, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting my tie and thinking about how different this felt from the corporate presentations I used to give. Back then, I spoke from a place of professional expertise, but personal emptiness. Today, I would be speaking from a place of authentic transformation and deep gratitude. "God," I prayed quietly, "use my story to encourage others who might be in their own dark nights. Help them see that you really do prepare the way, even when we can't see it." The event was held in a hotel conference room filled with about 75 local business owners, entrepreneurs, and professionals. As I looked out at their faces, I saw versions of my former self, ambitious, driven, but many of them carrying that subtle weight of anxiety about the future that I knew so well. I began with vulnerability. A year ago, I was unemployed, desperate, and terrified about my future. I thought my career was over, my potential was wasted, and God had forgotten about me. Tonight, I want to tell you about the night that changed everything, not because of what I did, but because of what God had already done before I even knew I needed it. As I shared my story, the job loss, the months of struggle, that pivotal night when God spoke to my heart, the coffee shop job that felt like a step backward but became a step toward my true calling, I watched faces in the audience change from polite attention to genuine engagement. I told them about Mrs. Chen and how learning to comfort others in their grief had healed my own heart, about Marcus and how investing in young people had given me a sense of legacy that no corporate achievement ever had, about Tom and Lisa, and how helping small businesses succeed had become more fulfilling than any six-figure salary. The marketing skills I thought I'd lost when I was laid off, I said, were actually being refined and redirected towards something more meaningful than I'd ever imagined. God wasn't taking away my career, He was transforming it into a calling. When I mentioned turning down the $95,000 job offer to stay with my current work, I heard several quiet gasps from the audience. In a room full of ambitious professionals, that decision probably seemed insane from a purely financial perspective. I know some of you are thinking I made a crazy choice, I said with a smile. But here's what I've learned. When you're walking in God's will, provision follows purpose. My income from the coffee shop and my marketing consultancy isn't as high as that corporate offer, but my life is richer than it's ever been. I wake up excited about each day instead of dreading it. I go to sleep grateful instead of anxious. After my presentation, the response was overwhelming. Person after person approached me with their own stories of struggle, uncertainty, and searching for deeper meaning in their work. There was Janet, a successful lawyer who felt trapped in a career that was killing her soul, but was afraid to make a change because of financial obligations. How do you know when God is calling you to something different? She asked. Start by asking yourself what breaks your heart and what brings you joy, I replied. God often speaks through our deepest compassions and our genuine passions. Then pay attention to the doors that open and the peace that comes with certain choices. Mark, a recently graduated MBA, shared his anxiety about choosing the right career path. There are so many options, so many ways to fail. How do you move forward when you can't see the whole path? You don't have to see the whole path, I told him. You just have to take the next faithful step. God's preparation is always one step ahead of where you are. Trust Him for tomorrow, but live faithfully today. The most moving conversation came with Susan, a middle-aged woman who had been laid off after 20 years with the same company. I feel like my life is over, she said with tears in her eyes. All those years of experience and now no one wants to hire someone my age. I don't know what to do. I looked into her eyes and saw my own desperation from a year ago. Susan, what if this isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of a new chapter? What if God is using this transition to redirect you toward something better than what you lost? We talked for 20 minutes about her skills, her passions, and her dreams that had been buried under years of corporate routine. By the end of our conversation, she was brainstorming ways to start a consulting business, helping other women navigate career transitions. You've given me hope, she said as she left. I haven't felt hopeful in months. The evening concluded with several people asking for my business card, not because they wanted marketing help, but because they wanted to continue conversations about faith, purpose, and finding God's direction in their careers. I realized that my marketing consultancy was becoming something larger, a ministry to professionals seeking meaning and purpose in their work. Driving home that night, I called my grandmother to tell her about the evening. I'm so proud of you, Danny, she said. You're doing exactly what God created you to do, using your gifts to serve others and point them toward hope. It's amazing, Grandma. A year ago, I thought my professional life was over. Tonight, I felt like it was just beginning. God has taken everything I experienced, the success, the failure, the fear, the breakthrough, and woven it into something I could never have planned. That's how He works, baby. He takes all our pieces, even the broken ones, and makes something beautiful. Your story isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to everyone who needs to hear that God really does prepare the way. The next morning at the coffee shop, I was still processing the events of the previous evening when Sarah approached me with excitement in her eyes. Daniel, I got 3 phone calls this morning from people who were at your presentation last night. They want to know if we'd be willing to host professional development workshops here, events that combine business skills with spiritual growth and community building. My heart leapt, another piece of God's preparation clicking into place. They specifically mentioned wanting to learn from someone who understands that success isn't just about money, but about purpose and service. They want workshops on finding calling in career, building ethical businesses, and creating work that serves others. As I considered this new opportunity, I felt that familiar peace that had become my guide for recognizing God's direction. This wasn't just about growing my business. It was about expanding the ministry God had given me, reaching more people who were searching for meaning in their professional lives. Let's do it, I said. Let's create a space where people can explore how their faith and their work can be integrated, where they can find community with others who want to make their careers matter for more than just personal gain. God's words to me, "Do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way," were proving true in dimensions I was still discovering. He wasn't just preparing opportunities. He was preparing me to handle larger responsibilities, to impact more lives, to be part of his larger plan for bringing hope and purpose to people who felt lost in their professional journeys. Tomorrow was looking brighter than ever, filled with possibilities I couldn't have imagined when I was sitting in my dark apartment a year ago, afraid and alone. God's preparation was still unfolding, still surprising me, still proving that his plans are always better than my plans. 18 months after God first spoke those life-changing words to my heart, I found myself standing in the renovated space next to the coffee shop, watching carpenters put finishing touches on what would become our new workshop and meeting center. Sarah and I had decided to expand, creating a dedicated space for the professional development workshops that had grown from 3 inquiries to a waiting list of over 200 people. The transformation was remarkable, but not nearly as remarkable as the transformation in my own understanding of how God works. What had started as a desperate prayer for help with my unemployment had become a thriving ministry that touched dozens of lives every week. The coffee shop remained the heart of our community, but now we were equipped to serve people in even deeper ways. Marcus, now a senior in high school, had become my unofficial assistant, helping set up for workshops and support group meetings. His transformation over the past year had been beautiful to watch, from a broken teenager struggling with his parents' divorce to a confident young man with a clear sense of purpose and calling. "Mr. Daniel," he said, as we arranged chairs for that evening's workshop on finding your purpose in business, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken that corporate job last year?" I paused in my work, considering his question. "You know, Marcus, I used to wonder about that, but I've learned that wondering about the paths we didn't take is just another form of fear about the future. God didn't just prepare one way for me, he prepared the best way. The corporate job was never really an option because it wasn't part of his plan. That evening's workshop was particularly special because it included several people whose stories had become intertwined with mine in profound ways. Tom was there, his handyman business now thriving enough that he'd hired 3 full-time employees. Lisa attended with her teenage daughter, whom she was mentoring in business skills. Mrs. Jen had brought her nephew, whose restaurant had become so successful he was opening a second location. But the most moving presence was Susan, the woman I'd met at the networking event 6 months ago. She had started her consulting business, helping women navigate career transitions, and was now earning more than she ever had in her corporate job, while making a difference in lives every day. "I want to share something with the group," Susan said during our opening circle. 6 months ago, I was convinced my life was over. 53 years old, laid off, feeling worthless and forgotten. Daniel told me that maybe this wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter. Tonight, I want to tell you that not only was he right, but this new chapter is better than anything I could have written for myself. She looked directly at me with tears in her eyes. "You taught me that God really does prepare the way. I just had to learn to trust his timing and his methods, even when they didn't look like what I expected." The workshop that night focused on discerning calling versus career, and I found myself sharing deeper truths than I'd ever shared publicly before. Sometimes God's preparation includes stripping away everything we think we need so we can discover what we actually need, I said. My unemployment wasn't punishment. It was preparation for something I never could have imagined. I talked about how God had used my marketing skills in ways I never anticipated, how he'd transformed my understanding of success from personal achievement to service of others, how he'd shown me that the most fulfilling work comes when our gifts align with his purposes. The question isn't whether God has prepared a way for your future, I continued. The question is whether you're willing to walk his prepared way instead of demanding he bless your preferred way. His way always leads to more fulfillment, more impact, and more joy than we can create on our own. After the workshop, a young woman named Rachel approached me. She was about my age, well-dressed, clearly successful, but carrying that familiar weight of someone searching for something more. "I'm a financial advisor," she said. "Good at it, make decent money, but I feel empty inside. Every day feels like I'm just helping rich people get richer while I slowly die inside. How do you know when God is calling you to make a change?" Her question took me back to my own journey, to those months of uncertainty and fear. "Rachel, can I ask you something? What breaks your heart about the world? What problems do you see that you wish you could help solve?" She thought for a moment. "Financial literacy. I see so many people, especially women and minorities, making terrible financial decisions because no one ever taught them the basics. They're trapped in cycles of debt and financial stress that could be broken with just a little education and guidance. And what would it look like if you used your financial expertise to serve those people instead of just the wealthy ones?" Her eyes lit up. "I've actually thought about that, starting a non-profit that provides financial education to underserved communities, maybe partnering with churches and community centers." "That sounds like calling to me," I said. "The fact that it breaks your heart and you have the skills to address it isn't a coincidence. That's God preparing you to make a difference in an area where you're uniquely gifted." We talked for another 30 minutes about practical steps she could take to transition from her current job to this new calling. By the end of our conversation, she had the beginning of a plan and the courage to take the first step. "Thank you," she said as she prepared to leave. "I haven't felt this excited about my future in years." Later that evening, as Sarah and I cleaned up from the workshop, she made an observation that stopped me in my tracks. "Daniel, do you realize what's happening here? You're not just helping people find better jobs or start businesses. You're helping them discover their calling. This workshop center isn't just about professional development. It's about spiritual formation through work." She was right. What had started as a simple coffee shop job had become a ministry that helped people integrate their faith with their work, their gifts with God's purposes, their careers with their calling. God had been preparing not just a way for my future, but a way for me to help others find their way too. That night, I sat in my apartment, the same place where God had first spoken to me, and marveled at the journey. 18 months ago, I'd been desperate, unemployed, and terrified. Tonight, I was fulfilled, purposeful, and excited about tomorrow. But more than that, I was part of something bigger than myself. The coffee shop, the support groups, the workshops, the consulting business, they were all pieces of God's larger plan to bring hope and purpose to people who felt lost in their professional journeys. I thought about Rachel, about Susan, about Marcus, about Tom and Lisa, and Mrs. Chen, and dozens of others whose lives had intersected with mine. Each one represented a confirmation that God's words to me were not just for me. They were for everyone who needs to hear that God really does prepare the way, that tomorrow doesn't have to be feared when it's held in his loving hands. As I prepared for bed, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. God, thank you for that night when you spoke to my heart. Thank you for preparing not just my way, but ways for all the people you've brought into my life. Help me never forget that your preparation is always perfect, always loving, always leading to something better than we can imagine. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new chances to encourage others in their journeys, new possibilities to see God's faithfulness in action, and I couldn't wait to see what he had prepared next. 2 years had passed since that life-changing night when God spoke to my desperate heart, and I stood at the podium of the largest conference room in downtown Chicago, looking out at an audience of over 500 business leaders, entrepreneurs, and professionals. The conference was titled Faith and Work, Finding Purpose in Your Professional Journey, and I was the keynote speaker. As I waited for the introduction to conclude, I thought about the miraculous journey that had brought me to this moment. From unemployed and desperate to speaking at one of the region's premier professional conferences, only God could have orchestrated such a transformation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator announced, "please welcome Daniel Thompson, founder of Purpose-Driven Professionals and author of the upcoming book, God Prepares the Way, Finding Your Calling in Your Career." The applause filled the room as I approached the microphone, but my heart was calm. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about sharing a message that could transform lives the way mine had been transformed. 2 years ago, I began. I was sitting in my small apartment, unemployed for 6 months, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay and rejection letters from jobs I desperately needed. I thought my life was over. I thought God had forgotten about me. I was terrified of tomorrow because I couldn't see any way forward. The room was already quiet, drawn in by the vulnerability of my opening. That night, in my darkest moment, God spoke to my heart with words that changed everything. "Daniel, do not fear tomorrow. I've already prepared the way." Today, I want to share with you what I've learned about God's preparation, about His faithfulness, and about finding your true calling in the midst of professional uncertainty. For the next 45 minutes, I shared the complete story. Not just the highlights, but the struggles, the doubts, the tests of faith, and the gradual unfolding of God's incredible plan. I talked about the coffee shop that felt like a step backward, but became a step toward my true calling. About the support group that grew into a movement. About the clients who became friends and the broken people who became whole. God's preparation, I explained, is rarely what we expect and almost always better than what we could plan for ourselves. He doesn't just prepare circumstances, He prepares our hearts, our skills, our relationships, and our character. He takes every experience, even the painful ones, and weaves them into something beautiful and purposeful. I shared about Marcus, now a college freshman studying business with a passion for community development, about Mrs. Chen, who had started a grief support ministry at her church, about Tom and Lisa, whose businesses had become pillars of their community, about Susan, who was now helping dozens of women every month navigate career transitions with faith and confidence. Each of these people represents a confirmation that God's words to me weren't just for me, I said. They were for everyone who needs to hear that God really does prepare the way, that tomorrow doesn't have to be feared when it's held in His loving hands. I talked about the moment when I turned down the corporate job offer, about learning that God's definition of success is often different from the world's definition, about discovering that the most fulfilling work comes when our gifts align with His purposes. The question isn't whether you have enough faith to trust God with your future, I continued. The question is whether you believe God loves you enough to prepare something better than what you can see right now. And I'm here to tell you, He does. As I neared the end of my presentation, I noticed tears in several faces throughout the audience. These were successful professionals, accomplished leaders, but many of them carried that same weight of uncertainty and searching that I had known so well. If you're sitting here today, struggling with fear about your future, if you're in a job that pays well but leaves you empty, if you've been laid off or passed over or feel like your dreams are dead, I want you to know this. God sees you. He knows your situation, and He has already prepared the way forward. I paused, letting those words sink in, remembering how desperately I had needed to hear them 2 years ago. But His way might not look like what you expect. It might involve taking what feels like a step backward. It might require releasing your grip on plans that seem safe and secure. It might mean trusting His timing, even when it doesn't make sense to you. The The conference ended with a standing ovation, but more importantly, it ended with hundreds of people inspired to seek God's direction in their professional lives. The book signing afterward turned into impromptu counseling sessions as person after person shared their struggles and asked for guidance. There was David, a successful surgeon who felt called to medical missions but was afraid to leave his lucrative practice. There was Maria, a marketing executive who wanted to start a non-profit but worried about financial security. There was James, a recent graduate paralyzed by the number of career options ahead of him. To each one, I offered the same truth that had transformed my life. God's preparation is always ahead of your faith. Trust Him for tomorrow, but live faithfully today. That evening, Sarah, Marcus, and several members of our original support group joined me for dinner to celebrate. As I looked around the table at these people who had become family, I was overwhelmed with gratitude for how God had woven our stories together. You know what amazes me most? Sarah said as we shared dessert. 2 years ago, you were afraid you didn't have a future. Tonight, you spoke to 500 people about how to find their future in God's plan. Only God could orchestrate that kind of transformation. Marcus, now 18 and preparing for his sophomore year of college, raised his glass of sparkling cider. To Mr. Daniel, who taught us that God's preparation is always better than our plans, and that tomorrow is always worth anticipating when it's in God's hands. As we toasted, I thought about the journey that had brought us all to this moment. Every struggle, every doubt, every small step of faith had been part of God's incredible preparation. The unemployment that had felt like failure was actually positioning me for purpose. The coffee shop job that seemed like a step backward was actually a step toward my true calling. The support group that started with 12 broken people had become a movement touching hundreds of lives. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, the same place where God had first spoken to me, though I had since moved to a larger space that could accommodate the life He had prepared for me. I opened my Bible to Jeremiah 29:11, the verse my grandmother had pointed me to so long ago. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. Plans. Present tense. Not future plans, but plans that were already known, already prepared, already set in motion before I even knew I needed them. I thought about the book that would be published next month, about the speaking engagements already scheduled for the next year, about the non-profit Sarah and I were launching to help unemployed professionals find both work and calling. Each opportunity was a confirmation that God's preparation extends far beyond what we can see or imagine. But most of all, I thought about the words He had spoken to me that night 2 years ago. Daniel, do not fear tomorrow. I have already prepared the way. Those words had proven true in every dimension of my life. He had prepared not just circumstances, but relationships, opportunities, character development, and spiritual growth. He had prepared a way for my career to become a calling, for my struggle to become a ministry, for my breakdown to become a breakthrough that could help others find their own breakthroughs. As I prepared for bed, I whispered one final prayer. God, thank you for that night when you spoke to my desperate heart. Thank you for every step of preparation, even the ones that hurt at the time. Thank you for showing me that your ways are always higher than my ways, your thoughts higher than my thoughts. Help me never forget that tomorrow is never something to fear when it's held in your loving, prepared hands. I fell asleep that night with a heart full of gratitude and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new chances to encourage others in their journeys, new possibilities to see God's faithfulness in action. Because now I knew with absolute certainty, God really does prepare the way, not just for me, but for everyone who trusts Him enough to follow where He leads, even when the path looks different from what we expected. Tomorrow is never something to fear when you know the one who has already been there, preparing every step with perfect love and infinite wisdom. The way is always prepared. We just have to trust enough to walk it.